In the last lesson, we discussed research design and its various aspects. Once the research design is in place, it is time to answer the research problem and its related hypothesis. But this cannot be done unless one collects the relevant information necessary for arriving at any suitable conclusions. The information thus collected is called as data. The content of this lesson is therefore concerned with data and its type, data types explained, techniques of primary data collection, that is, direct personal interviews, technique of primary data collection, that is, questionnaires. Then we'll be taking up techniques of primary data collections of schedules, observations, focus groups, experiments, and case study. After these primary data collection, we'll move on to the sources of secondary data collection. After that, we'll be taking up pros and cons of secondary data collection. Then we'll be moving on to the questionnaire, steps in questionnaire, what is the initial consideration while making questionnaire, whether we should go for self-administered or interviewer-assisted questionnaire. Then we'll have some clarification of concept. Further, we'll take up topology of questionnaire. And then we'll be moving on to questionnaire design, which will take into considerations the open-ended questions, closed-ended questions, prelim decisions in questionnaire decision. Then we'll move on to successful interviewing, then to pre-testing, and finally we'll end up this lesson by the pilot study, which is one of the most important tasks in building up efficient questionnaire analysis. Starting with data and its type. So data is a set of values of subjects with respect to qualitative or quantitative variables. Data is raw, organized facts that need to be processed. Data can be something simple and seemingly random and useless until it is organized. So, when the data is processed, organized, structured, or presented in a given context so as to make it useful, then it becomes information. Following are the types of data that we will be taking up in questionnaire analysis. We have primary data, secondary data, cross-sectional data, categorial data, time series data, spatial data, order data. We'll move on to this one by one. So let's start with the data types explanations. The first data type is the primary data. Primary data is an original and unique data which is directly collected by the researcher from a source according to his or her requirements. It is the data collected by the investigator himself or herself for a specific purpose, whereas secondary data refers to the data which has already been collected for a certain purpose and documented somewhere else. It is the data collected by someone else for some other purpose but is being utilized by the investigator for another purpose. Before moving further, let's have a clear-cut demarcation between primary data and the secondary data. So, if one carefully analyzes the difference between primary and secondary data, then we have, on the basis of collection purpose, primary data is basically collected for the problem. However, secondary data is collected for other problems. The collection process in primary is that wherein researcher has a wide role. While in secondary data, the data is collected at relatively faster pace than the primary. As far as the collection cost is considered, it is high for primary data, whereas it is relatively low for secondary data. The collection time too is long for primary data, and it is comparatively short for the secondary data. The accuracy in primary data is as desired, whereas secondary data, because of uncertainty of the collection of data, it is not known in advance. And lastly, the control with the researcher is complete in case of primary data, whereas in secondary data, it is not in the control. After this major classification, we can have categorical data or order data, wherein categorical data is the data which may be divided into groups. For example, the categories of gender, educational level, age group, etc. This data is not measured numerically. It is qualitative in nature. So, categorical data is known as the attribute-based data. As per hierarchy, if we move from categorical data, then we have the next data as the order data. So, the data which is categorical but is now ordered into some sequence, then that becomes an ordered data. For example, consider this question which is being asked in a questionnaire, and the question says, what is your class 12 stream? In this, the categories which are given are commerce, science and humanities. So such type of data is called as categorical data. However, if we look at this question wherein we are asking that rate the healthcare infrastructure in India, and the ranking is being asked from very poor to need improvements to satisfactory to very satisfactory. So there is a specific order in these categories, and hence this data falls under the category of ordered data. After this, let us take up cross-sectional data. Cross-sectional data is a type of data collected by observing many subjects, that can be individual, that can be firms, that can be countries or regions at the same point of time. That is, Without the regard of difference in time, the data is collected for multiple subjects. It is the data for a single time point or a single space point. This type of data is limited in that it cannot describe the changes over time or cause and effect relationships, in which one variable affects the other. An example of the cross-sectional data is, say, like this. We have employees and this salary indicates the salary per month of the employees, where employee IDs is 1901, 1902 and so on, and the salary for a particular month is, say, 9.5 and so on. Such type of data is a cross-sectional data. Time series data is the data which occurs wherever the same measurement is recorded on a regular basis. Quantities that represent or trace the values taken by a variable over a period, such as a month, quarter, or year, is basically a time series data. In this, the values of different phenomena such as temperature, weight, population, etc. can be recorded over a different period of time. The values of the variable remain increasing or decreasing, or there may not be a pattern in the time series data. One of the examples for time series data is the stock closing price. So this is from Yahoo Finance website, wherein we can find the stock closing price, opening price with respect to the change in dates. Such type of data is called as the time series data. Then next is the spatial data. This is basically the geospatial data or the geographic information, and it is the data or information that identifies the geographic locations of features and boundaries on Earth, such as natural or constructed features, oceans, and more. Railway data, that is railway roads data or railway routes data, is an example of spatial data. Spatial data is usually stored as coordinates and topology, and is data that can be mapped to. So today we are having geotags data. That geotag data is basically a data which is being fed as a spatial data. Spatial data is used in geographical information systems and other geolocation or positioning services. Spatial data consist of points, lines, polygons, and other geographic and geometric data which can be mapped by location as metadata or can be used in communication system to locate the end user devices. Starting with the techniques of primary data collection, first we have direct personal interviews. Interview method can be personal or telephonic. It can be structured or unstructured means of collecting the data. It mainly uses the verbal communication. That is, we have personal interview is a one-to-one interaction between the investigator or the interviewer and the interviewee. The purpose of the dialogue is research specific and ranges from completely unstructured to highly structured process. A typical interview may take from 20 minutes to close to an hour. Interview method has varied applications in business research and can be used effectively in various stages. Like, it can be used at problem definition level, wherein the interview method can be used right in the beginning of the study. Here, the researcher uses the method to get a better clarity about the topic under the study. Interview method can also be used in exploratory research because the exploratory research method is flexible and this method can be actively used over there. Then, interview method can be used in the situations when the area to be investigated is high on emotional responses. As said, interview can be telephonic interview or the personal interviewing. So, in personal methods, we have at-home interviews. That is, the face-to-face interaction takes place at the respondent's residence. We can have mall intercept interviews. As the name suggests, this method involves conducting interviews with the respondents as they are shopping in malls. Sometimes product testing or product reactions can be carried out through structured method and followed by 20 to 30 minute interview to test the reactions. Then we can have computer assisted personal interviewing, which is called as CAPI. This technique is carried out with the help of a computer. In this form of interviewing, the respondent faces an assigned computer terminal and answers a questionnaire on the computer screen by using the keyboard and mouse. The telephonic method replaces the face-to-face interaction between the interviewer and interviewee by calling the subjects and asking them a set of questions. So, the pros and cons of this method is the advantages takes into concern that the samples can be controlled in this, non-response and response bias can be detected, and then we can have in-depth information that can be collected. We can even get the subjective information in interview method. But the cons of this method are it is time consuming, it is expensive, and the interviewer may be biased. So, the analysis can be the biased analysis with the perspective of the interviewer. The method of data collection through questionnaires is quite popular, particularly in case of big inquiries. It is being adopted by private individuals, research workers, private and public organizations, and even by governments. In this method, a questionnaire is sent, usually by mail, to the persons concerned with a request to answer the questions and return the questionnaire. The questionnaire consists of a number of questions printed or typed in a definite order on a form or set of forms. The questionnaire is mailed to respondents who are expected to read and understand the questions and write down the reply in the space meant for the purpose in the questionnaire itself. In this, the respondents have to answer the questions on their own. So, we have that survey and questionnaires, which are the two similar tools. They are primarily used as a source of primary data collection. The advantages of this primary data collection technique are the respondents have adequate time to give responses. It is free from the bias of the interviewer and it is cheaper as compared to the interviews. But it has disadvantages too. That is, there are too much missing values in questionnaire filling. That is, there is a high rate of non-response bias. It is inflexible and can't be changed once sent, and it is a slow process. collection of data through schedules is very much similar to that of collection of data through questionnaire, but with a little difference, which lies in the fact that schedules, which are pro forma containing a set of questions, are being filled by the enumerators who are specially appointed for the purpose. These enumerators, along with schedules, go to the respondents, put to them the questions, and record the replies in the space meant for the same in the performer. Apart from this, there are other differences between questionnaire and schedules. Some are: the questionnaire is generally sent through mail to informants to be answered as specified in a covering letter, but otherwise without further assistance from the sender. The schedule is generally filled out by the research worker or the enumerator, who can interpret the questions when and wherever necessary. Non-response is usually high in case of questionnaire, as against it is generally low in case of schedules. In case of questionnaire, it is not always clear as to who replies, but in case of schedule, the identity of respondent is known. Then, questionnaire method can be used only when respondents are literate and cooperative, but in case of schedules, the information can be gathered even when the respondent happen to be illiterate. So, we have the pros of schedules are that we can expect a high response rate and it can be used for illiterate person as well, but the disadvantages are it induce bias from enumerator, is expensive, and has a small coverage. The primary data collection technique of observations is mostly used in studies related to behavioral sciences. The researcher uses observation as a scientific tool and method of data collection. Observation as a data collection tool is used systematically and is usually subjected to checks and controls. Observation becomes a specific tool and method of data collection for the researcher when it serves a formulated research purpose. Under the observation method, the information is sought by way of investigators' own direct observation without asking from the respondent. For instance, in a study relating to consumer behavior, the investigator, instead of asking the brand of wristwatch used by the respondent, may himself look at the watch. So, the advantage of observation method is the data is usually objective and data is not affected by past or future events. However, it is expensive and the information is limited in the technique of primary data collection via observation method. Next in the basket of primary data collection is the focus groups. Focus groups are gathering of two or more people with similar characteristics or who possesses common traits. They seek open-ended thoughts and contributions from participants. A focus group is a primary source of data collection because the data is collected directly from the participant. It is commonly used for market research where a group of market consumers engage in discussion with a research moderator. Focus group discussion is a highly versatile and dynamic method of collecting primary data from a representative group of respondents. There are a group of carefully selected respondents who are specifically invited and gathered at a neutral setting. The moderator initiates the discussion and then the group carries it forward by holding a focused and an interactive discussion. The key elements of a focus group discussion are size, that is, the number of members in focus group discussion. So it is recommended that ideal size for a group discussion is from 8 to 12 members. Then, considering the nature, we should have that the individuals who are from a similar background in terms of demographic or psychographic traits must be included, otherwise disagreement might emerge as a result of other factors rather than the one under study. Then it has been found that knowing each other in a group discussion can hamper the free flow of the discussion. So it is recommended that group should consist of strangers rather than subjects who know each other. So considering these, the disadvantages of focus group discussion technique are: the response bias is a problem in this case because a participant might be subjective to what people will think about sharing a sincere opinion. Then, group thinking does not clearly mirror individual opinions. However, it has advantages too, that is, it takes lesser time and it incurs a low cost compared to interviews. This is because the interviewer does not have to discuss each question with each participant individually. Then, in an experiment mode of primary data collection, the researcher attempts to understand the causes, effects, and processes involved in a particular process. An experiment is a structured way of collecting the primary data. This data collection method is usually controlled by the researcher, who determines which subject is used, how they are grouped, and the treatment they receive. So, it is usually objective since the data recorded are results of a process. The another advantage of experiment technique is non-response bias is eliminated. However, it is expensive, and in this, incorrect data may be recorded due to human error. The last but not the least technique of primary data collection is case study research based primary data collection method. Case study research is a qualitative research method that is used to examine contemporary real life situations and apply the findings of the case to the problem under study. Case studies involve a detailed contextual analysis of a limited number of events or conditions and their relationships. It provides the basis for the application of ideas and extension of methods. It helps a researcher to understand a complex issue or object and add strength to what is already known through previous research. According to H. Odom, the case study method is a technique by which individual factor, whether it be an institution or just an episode in the life of an individual or a group, is analyzed in its relationship to any other in the group. The vital characteristics of case study methods are: Under this method, the researcher can take one single social unit or much of such units for his study purpose. He may even take a situation to study the same comprehensively. Then, the selected units in the case study are intensive, that is, they are studied with minute details. In respect of case study method, an effort is made to know the mutual interrelationship of the causal factors. Under case study method, the behavioral pattern of the concerning unit is studied directly and not by an indirect and abstract approach. The case study method results in fruitful hypotheses along with the data which may be helpful in testing them, and thus it enables the generalized knowledge to get richer and richer. In its absence, generalized social science may get handicapped. So, in this, the procedure is as follows. Firstly, in case study, we identify and define the research question. Then, we go with selecting the cases. Then, we take up the collection of data process. Later, we evaluate and analyze the data. And then, there is presentation of results. So, the major advantage of case study method is that this method has proved beneficial in determining the nature of units to be studied along with the nature of the universe. This is the reason why at times the case study method is alternatively known as mode of organizing data. Case study constitute the perfect type of sociological material as they represent a real record or personal experiences which very often escape the attention of most of the skilled researchers using other techniques. Case study method enhances the experience of the researcher, and this in turn increases his ability in analyzing and giving the results properly. But it has the danger of false generalization, which is always there in view of the fact that no set rules are followed in collection of the information and only few units are studied. Then case study method is based on several assumptions which may not be very realistic at times, and as such the usefulness of case study is always the subject of doubt. But despite the stated limitations, case study are being undertaken in several disciplines, particularly in sociology, as a tool of scientific research in view of several advantages already taken up. Besides, case studies in modern times can be conducted in such a manner that the data are amenable to quantification and statistical treatment. Possibly, this is also the reason why case studies are becoming popular day by day. With these techniques of primary data collection, we are moving on to sources of secondary data collection. Majorly, secondary data collection sources can be divided into internal sources and external sources. Internal sources can be company records, that includes all the data about the inception, the owners, and the mission and vision statements, infrastructure, and other details, including both the processes and manufacturing, if any, and sales, as well as historical timeline of the events. It also includes employee records. Then it can include the sales data, that is of different forms. That can be cash register receipt, that can be salesperson's call records, that can be sales invoices. Then financial records and sales reports are internal sources of data. Apart from this, the external data sources can be books, personal sources, journal, newspaper, website, government record, etc. It is to be noted that secondary data are readily available compared to that of primary data. It requires very little research and need for manpower to use these resources. And with the advent of electronic media and the internet, secondary data sources have become more easily accessible, like some of the sources that are available widely on internet are books, published sources, unpublished sources, journals, newspapers, websites, government records. So, although secondary data is easily accessible as compared to primary data, but researcher must be very careful in using the secondary data. He must take a minute scrutiny because it is just possible that secondary data may be unsuitable or may be inadequate in the context of the problem which the researcher wants to study. In this regard, A.L. Bowley very aptly says that it is never safe to take published statistics at their face value without knowing the meaning and limitations, and it is always necessary to criticize arguments that can be based on them. So, as a word of precaution, before using secondary data, you must take care of the following characteristics. Be very much sure with respect to the reliability of data, that is, who collected the data, what are the sources of data, where they collected, were they collected by using proper methods, at what time they were collected, was there any compiler bias, etc. Then suitability of data should be very much seen, that is, the data should be suitable for the purpose of our inquiry. Then the level of adequacy should be checked thoroughly. So with these precautions, the advantages and disadvantages of using secondary data collection techniques is as follows. The merits are secondary data collection allows the ease of access, it is inexpensive, it is time saving, and it can be longitudinal and comparative studies based data. However, the disadvantages are the major concern is the data quality. Then we might land up with irrelevant data. We might take up exaggerated data, or we might work on the outdated information. So, while using secondary data, be careful in terms of reliability, adequacy, and suitability of the data. With the concepts of research problem, research design, types of data, and other basic concepts, we are now moving towards the making of a questionnaire. Questionnaire is a formalized set of questions which is made for obtaining information from respondents. But do remember that questionnaire is a method and is not an end in itself. The questionnaire is a research technique that consists of a series of questions asked to respondents in order to obtain statistically useful information about a given topic. It is one of the most cost-effective methods of collecting primary data, which can be used with considerable ease by most individuals and business persons and researchers. It has the advantage of flexibility of approach and can be successfully adapted for most research studies. So with this, let us move on to the steps that are required in making a questionnaire. The first step in making a questionnaire is taking into consideration the initial considerations. Step 2 is clarification of concepts. Step 3, typology of questionnaire. Pre-testing of a questionnaire is step 4. And finally, step 5 is administering of a questionnaire. Let us take these steps in detail. The very first step is initial consideration. The focus of this step is basically that by this stage we should have the clarification of research problem and objectives. We should be able to identify information needed and sources of information. We should be able to define the target population and sampling frame. Then we should determine the sampling approach, sample size, and expected response rate, and also the method of data collection. Okay, basically the first step in questionnaire is to specify all these points mentioned. That is, as the research project progresses, the information needed becomes more clearly defined. It is helpful to review the component of the problem and the approach, particularly the research questions, hypothesis, and characteristics that influences the research design, to ensure further that the information obtained fully addresses all the components of the problem. The researcher should prepare a set of dummy tables. A dummy table is a blank table used to present findings. It portrays how the analysis will be structured once the data have been collected. Then it is also vital to have a clear idea of the target participants. The characteristics of the participant group have a great influence on the questionnaire design. So, by the end of this step 1, that is initial consideration, one should be able to convert the research objective into information areas. For example, suppose a research question aims at studying the nature of jute bag usage among people in a particular city. Then, for this, the research objectives will be to identify the different uses of jute bags, to find out the method of disposal of jute bags, to find out how jute bags can be used, and to find out what is the level of consciousness that people have about the environment. Then the variables that can be studied under this is usage, behavior, demographic details. And the primary information that will be required will be pertaining to usage of jute bags and its utility. And obviously in this, the population to be studied will be the consumers and the retailers. Now, by the end of this step, one should be very much clear about the mode and the method of data collection. Online and postal surveys are self-administered, so the questions must be simple and detailed instructions must be provided. In online surveys, the complex skip patterns and randomization of questions can eliminate the order bias, which is very helpful. In face-to-face interviews, participants see the questionnaire and interact with the interviewer. Thus, lengthy, complex, and varied questions can be asked. In telephone interviews, the participants interact with the interviewer, but they do not see the questionnaire. This limits the type of questions that can be asked to short and simple ones. Questionnaires designed for face-to-face and telephone interviews should be written in a conversation style. Also, depending on the respondent capabilities, their educational background, their vocabulary level, the prior experience in completing questionnaires, their age, their cultural issues should be considered, or in order to finalize whether the questionnaire should be self-administered or interviewer-assisted questionnaire. After this step 1 comes another important step, that is clarification of concept. In this, the focus should be made to ensure that the concepts are clearly defined. One should be able to select the variables and indicators to represent the concept, and by this level, one should determine the level of measurements of the variables too. So, in this step, the purpose is to determine the matter to be included as questions in the measure. The researcher needs to do an objective quality check in order to see what research objective information need the question would be covering before using any of the framed questions. How essential is it to ask the question? You must remember that the time of respondent is precious and it should not be wasted. Unless a question is adding to the data needed for getting an answer to the research problem, it should not be included. For example, if one is studying the usage of jute bags, then demographic questions on age, group, occupation, education, gender might make sense. But questions related to marital status, family size, and state may not be required, as they do not have direct relationship with the usage or the attitudes toward the jute bags. Further, the questionnaire should not take into account double-barreled question. What is double-barreled question? Sometimes several questions are needed to obtain the required information in an unambiguous manner. Consider the question, do you think Coca-Cola is a tasty and refreshing straw? For example, consider the question, do you think this drink is a tasty drink and refreshing soft drink? A yes answer will assume that it is tasty and it is refreshing too. But is it conveying the proper information? No. Such type of a question is called as double-barreled question, because two or more questions are combined into one. So, to obtain the required information, two distinct questions should be asked. Question 1, do you think the drink is a tasty drink? And question number 2, do you think the drink is a refreshing straw? And question 2, do you think that the drink is a refreshing soft drink? Then suppose we are making a questionnaire in which we are taking up the analysis on the eating habits. So in that, the question can be, when you go out to eat, on an average, your bill amount is, Option A, less than say rupees 100. Another option, 101 to 250, 251 to 500, or more than 500. And second, how often do you eat out in a week? 1 to 2 times, 3 to 4 times, 5 to 6 times, or 6 times more? Then such type of questions can be asked where you are going with eating habits and the cost spent in eating by a family. In this, the scale of measurement for the first question is ordinal, while the other, that is how often do you eat in a week, is a categorial data, that is dividing the options into different parts. One must be careful for gathering the sensitive information required for the questionnaire. For example, suppose you need to ask, have you ever used fake receipts to claim your medical allowance? Then asking a question in such a manner is incorrect. One may rephrase it to the form, do you associate with people who use fake receipts to claim their medical allowance? So one should be very much careful with the sensitive information that is being asked in the questionnaire. After the step of clarification of concept comes another important step in questionnaire making, and that is typology of questionnaire. Typology of questionnaire aims to determine the type of questions to be included in the questionnaire along with the order. It focuses on the wordings too. Then it is based on grouping of questions and overall length of questionnaire, and it also takes into account the structure and the length of the questionnaire. So basically, a question in a questionnaire can be of unstructured form or it can be a structured form. Unstructured questions are open-ended questions that participants answer in their own words. They are also referred to as free response or free answer questions. Some examples of unstructured questions are, what is your occupation? Who is your favorite film personality? What do you think of the people who patronize second-hand clothes shops? Whereas structured questions are well-defined questions and they specify the set of response alternatives and the response format. There are basically 3 types of structured questions in a questionnaire: multiple choice questionnaire, multiple choice question, dichotomous question, or a scale-based question. In a multiple choice question, the researcher provides a choice of answers and participants are asked to select one or more of the alternatives given in that question. For example, consider the question, do you intend to buy a new AC within the next 6 months? And the options for this are, I'll definitely not buy, probably will not buy, it's undecided, probably will buy, definitely will buy. Then such a question is a multiple choice question. Then in questionnaire, we can have a dichotomous question which is headed by 2 response alternatives. That can be either in yes or no, or it can be agree, disagree. So the question that may come under this type is, a question under this type can be, do you intend to buy a new watch within the next 6 months? Yes, no, don't know. This type of question is dichotomous question. Then we can have scale-based question also, wherein we can give the choices in the levels. For example, give your feedback on the scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not satisfied at all and 5 being highly satisfied. Then such a question is a scale-based question. Apart from this, it's vital to work on the question wording. Question wording is a translation of the desired question content and structure into words that participants can clearly and easily understand. Deciding on question wording is perhaps the most critical and difficult task in developing a questionnaire. So, in order to have a good questionnaire, one should have questions that works related to the issue. We should use ordinary words. We should avoid unambiguous words. We should avoid leading or biased questions in our questionnaires. For example, the questions related to defining of the issue can be of the form, which brand of shampoo do you use? Now, when we are defining such type of question, then it is not clearly defining what we are asking for. A better wording for this question would be which brand or brands of shampoo you have personally used at home during the last month. In the case of more than one brand, please list all the brands that apply. So, such type of questions in the questionnaire adds beauty to it. Then one should be very clear in stating the questions by keeping the questions as simple as possible. For example, do you think thermal wear provides immunity? Then this involves a technical word. One should make it simple by using protection from the cold. Like, this question can be reframed as, do you think that thermal wear provides you protection from the cold? Further, in our questionnaire, we should avoid questions that creates ambiguity. The words used in the questionnaire should mean the same thing to all those who are answering that questionnaire. For example, consider the question, how often do you visit a store? Never, occasionally, sometimes, often, or regularly. Now this question has lot of words that are subjective and relative in meaning. A better way to put this question is, in a typical month, how often do you visit a store? Less than once, 1 or 2 times, 3 or 4 times, or more than 4 times. So, by writing a same question in this manner, we'll improvise the response rate of the questionnaire. Then one should avoid leading questions. Any question that provides a clue to the respondents in terms of the direction in which one wants them to answer is called a leading or bias question. For example, do you think that working mothers should buy ready-to-eat food when that might contain some chemical preservatives? Yes, no, don't know. Now this is an incorrect manner of putting the question. the question would mostly generate a negative answer. A better way is to construct a neutral question, which is, do you think that working mothers should buy ready to eat food? Yes, no, don't know. So, by adopting these simple measures, one can simplify the questionnaire in the best possible manner. Then comes the role of arranging the question in proper order. The order of questions is of equal importance to the wording used in the questions. Questions communicate and set participants in a particular frame of mind. This frame of mind is set at the start of the questioning process and can change as each question is posed and responded to. It affects how participants perceive individual questions and respond to those questions, as well as understanding the characteristics of language in target participants. Questionnaire designs must be aware of the logical connections between the questions as perceived by the target participants. So, we should be very careful in determining the opening questions, as opening questions are crucial in gaining the confidence and cooperation of participants. The questions should be interesting, simple, and non-threatening. Questions that ask participants for their opinions can be a good start because people like to express their opinions. Though classification questions seem simple to start a questionnaire, issues such as age, gender, income can be seen. However, opening a question with these questions tend to make participants concerned about the purpose of these questions and indeed the whole survey. However, in some instances, it is necessary to qualify participants to determine whether they are eligible to participate in the interview or not. So, typically, the information in a questionnaire is divided into three groups. A. Basic information. B. Classification information. C. Identification information. Basic information relates directly to the research problem. Classification information consists of socio-economic and demographic characteristics that are used to classify the participants, understand the results, and validate the sample. Then the third type of question are the identification questions that include name, postal address, email address, and telephone number, etc. So with these three type of question, we can frame a good questionnaire. So as we have discussed, there can be two type of questions in a questionnaire. One is open-ended and another is closed-ended. Open-ended questions are typically used in exploratory studies. They allow respondents the freedom of choice. The respondents must be articulate and willing to spend time giving a full textual answer. Data is narrative in form, which is actually difficult to code and analyze. Possible researcher bias is there in the interpretation, and it can be analyzed using content analysis. Again, some illustrations can be what is your age, what is your favorite TV serial, etc. Then we have taken up the closed-ended questions too, wherein we divided the question into multiple choice, dichotomous, and scale-based questions. So they are typically used in quantitative studies. These data are pre-coded and are easy to analyze. Researcher has knowledge pre-specify the responses, then it is difficult to design, but it simplifies the analysis. And the greatest advantage of closed-ended question is they provide a limited range of response options that can be analyzed using statistical tools and techniques. So, once we work on typology, then major part of the questionnaire is done. The logical sequence, the wordings, open-ended, close-ended structure. This will improvise the making of a questionnaire. After all these criticalities, let us take up preliminary decisions in questionnaire design. So there are 9 steps that are involved in the development of a questionnaire. Step 1, decide the information required. Step 2 is to identify the target respondents. Step 3, take up the methods which can make you reach to your target respondents. Decide on the question content, whether it should be open-ended, whether it should be closed-ended, whether it should be structured, whether it should be unstructured. Then develop the question wording. Put questions into a meaningful order and format. Check the length of the questionnaire. Our questionnaire should not be so small, neither it should be too big. Pre-test the questionnaire, and then the last step is develop the final survey form. For this, one of the most important tool is the pilot study. Pilot study is also known as feasibility study, and it is a small scale implementation of a larger study or a part of a larger study. It is a trial run of entire study from start to finish that increases the likelihood of success of main study. It is conducted to test the entire research process from a methodological standpoint in actual field conditions. So, in pilot testing, one gets the idea whether the question wording are clear or not, the sequence of the questions are correct or not, whether the questionnaire serves the purpose of what we want to study or not. All these aspects can be corrected after holding the pilot survey. Sometimes the researcher might also get the questionnaire vetted by academic or industry experts for their inputs. As far as possible, the pilot survey should be a small scale survey of the actual survey that would be subsequently conducted. And after this, one should go with the step of administering the questionnaire. That is, once these steps are completed, the final instrument or the final questionnaire is ready for the conduction, and the questionnaire needs to be administered according to the sampling plan. So finally, to conclude with, do pay heed to the concerns, to the typology, to the interview method while making your questionnaire. And once your questionnaire is made, do not go directly for large scale surveying respondents. Do go for pilot survey, and then on the basis of the pilot study analysis, do improvise your questionnaire so that effective and efficient responses can be jotted from the designed survey. So with this, we conclude this lesson wherein we dealt with data collection, and the questionnaire making. So wish you all a happy learning. Thank you.